Hello, Tennessee Voices viewers. This is a very special edition of the Tennessee Voices video podcast. I'm David Plazas, your host, the Opinion and Engagement Director for the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Tennessean. My guest today is Ben Goad, who is the new news director for the Tennessean. Yes, the new news director. Ben, how are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you for having me on, Dave.
Absolutely. And a lot of people in the business community and the music community are very familiar with you because of your past work. But I'd love for you to introduce yourself a little bit about your experiences both at the Tennessean and before.
Sure. So I have been in Nashville for just about 6 years. In that time, I have been what we call a content strategist or an editor that leads some of our reporting teams here. I've been over all of our business coverage, including healthcare and coverage, of course, of the pandemic over the last couple of years, and also the music editor. So the fun part of my job is covering our country music scene and all the other genres here in town. It's obviously a very lively music scene. So I've been doing that for the last 6 years. Before that, I was in Washington, D.C. for 8 years, where I was both a reporter and an editor covering the White House and Congress and agencies in Washington. That was throughout most of the Obama administration. And before that, I was in Southern California. And before that, Chicago, where I'm from. And I know you spent a lot of time.
I am. I'm originally from there, so we're from about the same area of Chicago. That's fun, Chi-Town. So tell me a little bit about the role of news director. What does that mean for people who haven't heard of that role before? What are your responsibilities, and what's your vision for the newsroom?
Yeah. Well, first, it is what it says. It's directing the news coverage of the Tennessean on a day-to-day basis. So I oversee all of our editors and reporters and photographers, all under the leadership, of course, of our vice president and regional editor, Mike Anastasi. But my role is to sort of chart the course on a day-to-day basis and direct the news coverage as the everyday dictates. And of course, as you know, every day is a completely different adventure in the newsroom. And it's really an exciting time to be in Nashville. I think, all you have to do is look out any window and see the cranes that tower over all of our buildings to know how much change is happening throughout both the urban core of Nashville and all the surrounding counties, which we, of course, cover as well. And so I think part of the job that I have is to help tell the story of how Nashville is changing, and it's changing in big ways, and that brings a lot of good things, and it brings along some challenges, and so part of the job is highlighting those challenges as well.
Your team and under your leadership have received several accolades and awards for work from the pandemic coverage that you mentioned earlier, but also from Hallowed Sound, which for people, I'll definitely put a link within the notes of this video podcast where you can learn more about the intersection of music, African-American roots, and so forth. Will you talk a little bit about that project? Because this is your baby, I think.
It was certainly a passion project for me, and I was very fortunate to have an amazing team to work with for that project. And we were able to tap journalists not only all over Tennessee, but really all over the country to help tell the story about Black influences and contributions to American pop culture and music. And, we thought, what better place than Tennessee, which, of course, is the home of country music, but also blues and rock and roll with Elvis Presley and all the influences that led up to him, and Stax and Fame down in Memphis and Muscle Shoals. So it was a great experience to highlight a lot of the sort of untold stories of Black music in dating all the way back to the early 1900s and up until modern day. We were lucky to be recognized by a number of different institutions for our work, and we think it's really crucial to our mission to tell those stories that often have not been told.
And it's exciting, and I'm grateful to you for opening the door to many music executives. And we've just started our first in a series of interviews with country music executives. Randy Goodman from Sony and his team earlier this year with our colleague LeBron Hill writing those columns. And we'll be having soon features with CMA, the Country Music Association, and also Ryman Properties. This has been the gamut of your experience and work extends, as you mentioned, from music to business. And I've been here for 8 years almost, and I have seen the massive change. When I look outside our address, which, by the way, we're 1801 West End Avenue for people who are keeping track, 1100 Broadway. We left a couple of years ago. Actually, it's almost 3 years, I think, now. And we have these views of the skyline and these views of skyscrapers that weren't there just even 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Could you talk a little bit about the coverage? You talk about this changing Nashville, and it is, I think, on the minds of everybody.
Mm. Well, one of the biggest examples of that is happening right along the riverfront on both sides of the Cumberland, really. And we've done a series of big picture, we call them projects, looking at how that part of town is really being transformed. Of course, Nashville may be getting a new NFL football stadium. There are a number of new neighborhoods going in near where Oracle has announced their headquarters. Major developments. We're talking about billions of dollars. So we are, part of our mission is to, like I said, chronicle that change and explain to people what's coming for Nashville. But another part of it is to highlight the other end of this development. And we're seeing an affordable housing crisis, and your reporting, David, has been so strong on over the last several years on what's happening with some of our population that has been really pushed outside of the Nashville downtown area, the center core of what Nashville is. And so, we want to tell the story of what we're losing with all this growth too. And, that can be affordable housing and some of the gentrification that we're seeing, but it can also even go to Nashville's authenticity. That's a tough word to say, which is really a very important part of the brand. It's why we've seen such explosive growth here, is because there's a culture in Nashville that's like nowhere else in the country, and people want to experience that. And so as we grow, how are we as a city and a county and surrounding area, how are we taking steps to preserve that authenticity?
And one of the things that I was very excited to interview you, in part because you've got such a compelling story, but also you've had this really amazing view of the city and what's ahead. And I also want to transition to talking about journalism itself, because one of the things I get to talk about when I'm out and about is the fact that journalism is very much alive. Obviously, the industry has been disrupted for quite a few decades. But talk to me about your philosophy on journalism, your philosophy on the news, and how you see the Tennessean's role today and into the future.
Well, I started out as, like many journalists, as a police reporter, covering crime out of the police stations on the south side of Chicago. And I think a lot of my philosophy on the importance of journalism stems from those days where, I understood as much then as I do now the importance of giving a voice to the voiceless. And so I think our role as journalists is to be a part of the community that makes Nashville a better place. And that can be whether we're talking to renters who have found themselves priced out of the market, or holding public officials accountable for their decisions and votes and things that they do. Or it can just be giving people the news they need to live their lives, whether that is getting people prepared for an approaching storm. And we all know that those seem to be coming faster and more furious than ever, or how to navigate a global pandemic that really upended everybody's life. So I view our responsibility as a really sacred thing. And I'm very excited about the opportunity to help direct that.
Absolutely. Tennessee is such a fascinating state to me. Having been here for the last few years, you have, these, intersection of different types of politics, be it in Nashville itself or across the state of Tennessee. And something big could happen in 2024. The Republican National Committee could bring its convention here. For people who are not familiar how, the Tennessean covers an event like that, regardless of whose party it is, could you talk a little bit about the process it takes to develop it? Because people see the end product, but they don't usually know what goes behind in terms of all the plans or what goes behind the mobilization of journalists to cover whether it's a weather event or whether it's a big conference.
Well, if the RNC comes to Nashville, and certainly we're in the final two, we've made the finals, and it's either Nashville or Milwaukee. If it happens, it will be something that impacts every Nashvilleian in some way. I've covered four of them over the years in different cities, and it really will transform the look and feel of Nashville, not only during those 4 days or so, but in the weeks ahead. There will be streets blocked off. There will be huge events and tons of new people coming in town, hundreds, thousands of people. The delegates alone number into several hundred. So we're talking about a huge influx of people and money into Nashville, but also national attention. And so when that happens, and if that happens, we will deploy the entire newsroom in some way or another to help cover this. I mean, we'll have our wonderful music writers, covering the shows, and there'll suddenly be a lot of big names, even more than usual, showing up in town for events. And certainly there's a big police and public safety element to all of this. There'll be a totally elevated number of emergency officials everywhere, and protests that comes with these kind of things. So we have to cover all of that. And then certainly the proceedings themselves. This is a really important part of our political process. And even though there's a lot of symbolism at this point in the process, it is still the actual selection of a candidate for either party is a really big deal, and we'll have a front row seat, and we'll be able to give all of Nashville and really all of the country a front row seat to everything that's happening. So I think we'll see if we get it, but if we do, the Tennessean will certainly be ready to cover it.
Yeah, either way, we've had different events from religious broadcasters. Garth Brooks was here, finally got to do his concert this year as opposed to last year because of the storm. So I want to turn to your origin story. You mentioned you're from the Chicago area, but how did you decide to become a journalist, and what has kept you going in this field?
Well, honestly, I was a kid, and when I went to college in Indiana, DePaul University, I set out. I thought I'd be a novelist, maybe, and I read and I wrote a lot of things. And when I graduated, there was for a moment where I turned around and said, I can't just write a novel. I need a real job. And so I went into a newsroom, a place called the City News Bureau of Chicago, and unsolicited, and I found the editor, and I asked him whether I could have a job. And Paul Zimbracos was his name. And Paul said, what do you think this job is? And I told him that it was, I heard there was really bad hours, and the pay was egregious, and there wasn't much glory to be had, but you could get a start there. And I thought maybe that would sort of tide me over until I made it big in the fiction novel business. And so I started, and in those very first weeks, at that time, I would have to dictate stories from the field, and I'd hardly ever be in the office. You'd be in the police stations, or you'd be at a crime scene or some public event, and telling those stories, usually over a payphone with a pocket full of quarters, to a rewrite on the other end, really moved something in me, I think, and the idea that I could bring the stories of people who were doing a lot of the living and dying on the south side of Chicago to a greater audience. I felt very strongly pulled in that direction, and so I continued on that path, and I graduated to the overnight shift, which was the midnight to 8 a.m. shift in Chicago, which meant stop at the morgue at 5 in the morning every morning to pick up the list of all the folks who had passed away the night before, and then getting going on telling some of those stories, and then ultimately graduating to a larger beat there before moving on in my career to another newspaper in Southern California. But I'll always say that no matter what happens in my life going forward, I don't think I'll ever have a job as good and as important as that first job I had as a cub reporter. Who, the thing about the City News Bureau in those days in Chicago is you didn't have a name. You were just City News. And so the other reporters in town or the politicians, the mayor of Chicago would just call you City News. And, there was something about having that background that I've always been proud of.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And tell me a little bit about your family here. I know that you have a new addition to your family as well.
Yeah. So my wife Casey is works for the Metro Schools, and she is in special education and is a coach of teachers that help our special ed children across the public schools in Nashville. So she oversees several teachers at different schools, and really proud of the work that she's doing. And our son Benji is in second grade. We live in East Nashville, right along the Cumberland here near Shelby Park, and we love to spend a lot of time over there on the trails and at the park and at baseball games and on Saturdays in the spring if they don't get rained out. We have a game this afternoon that it's looking precarious. And then, yes, our newest addition is Blue the dog, our 4-month-old sheepadoodle, who is luckily taking a nap right now, but will be up and a scamp again before I know it.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Ben Goad, News Director for the Tennessean, here as part of the USA Today Network. Delighted to have you on the show. For those who are looking to support the local journalism, please go to Tennessean.com/subscribe, where you can get a great deal on the wonderful work that the reporters and editors that Ben oversees are doing. Always wish you the best success. Just find you a remarkable human being and professional. And before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests if they would leave some words of wisdom for the audience to help us get through this time.
Sure. Well, I'll leave you the words that someone left me on the desk when I first took over as news director a couple of weeks ago, and it's I think advice that anybody can use, whatever line of work you're in, and that's that you'll have a lot of tough decisions that face you every day and every week in whatever job you do. And if you always do the right thing by the people that you're trying to serve, and for me, that's our subscribers and the people of Nashville, and no matter what happens, you'll always be able to look yourself in the face the next day.
Well, thank you so much, Ben. May you stay well and healthy, and I so appreciate your time today.
Thanks, David.